Great, we're live. Hey, Gil, how you doing?
Hey, David. Great being here. Thanks for having me back.
No problem. And our continued series here on people-driven agile and agile after maybe what we call the fall from grace or the changes that have occurred since mid
hmm
2022. And I think today we're talking about strategies for success post change, learning from some of the missteps that have occurred. Sounds
Oh
about
yeah,
right?
yeah. People-driven Agile. Yeah.
So, Gil's got a ton of practical real world experience. I bring, my experience on the training side, working in agile training since 2006. So we do have a lot of real world ideas, thoughts, what we've seen, what has happened, what's happening right now. So let's really jump into it and say, we were just talking in the green room, as I call it, and somebody asked you, like, what happened? Was it the process, the way of working? Was it the framework? You know, Tell us about that.
It's interesting. That's a broad, and I got to hand it to you, Dave. That's a broad question because what caused Agile to fail in one company isn't necessarily the same thing that caused it to fail in another.
Mm-hmm.
However, in doing my research, I found out there were a number of things that a lot of companies that failed kind of started doing, which is what led them to failure. I mean, one, as I said last time, the lack of executive support. They wanted the agile principles to come into an organization, but no one in the senior leadership was really interested in taking the lead and taking it as part of it. They just delegated it down to people a few levels below them and say, "Hey, make it happen."
Yes, it's
And
almost like It's almost like a parlor game. Let's just see how this works out, and I'll stay above the fray. And you see that in a lot of situations where leadership will want the team to try something new, but they'll stay away from it so they can act as a quasi god, so they can snipe and make comments. It's pretty interesting though, but that dynamic happens a lot in marketing and sales, and of course, this dynamic certainly happened in the agile space for sure. Keep going.
yeah, also, I mean, we see this all over in successful companies as well as companies that did not succeed with agile, and that's the cultural resistance to
Mm-hmm.
that inflexible. The culture is set in their ways; they don't want to do anything new, and agile is just the
Now, when you
next
say
flavor
from that
coming.
perspective, people talk
hmm
about it a lot. Was it more at the
Yeah.
developer level? Was it more at the project
Ah.
team level or the project management level, the PMO level? Where did you see most, like, for instance, I saw a lot of resistance at the developer level where I would talk to developers and they just thought it was a bunch of fooey. Just let me go off and code.
Developers, well, in my experience, that's where I saw the most resistance. But you also saw it at the mid management level as well. And it
Mm-hmm.
just, for whatever reason, I don't know, but it played with each other. They played towards each other against, oh, this is not going to work. And you started inventing reasons why it wasn't going to work. But the fundamental reason was you didn't even want to change. This is how we've always done it. This is how I've always done it as a developer. I've been a developer for 20 years, very successfully. Why
Yep.
do I all of a sudden I have to change?
So you think as coding principles change, so one of the issues that we see here is that low code, no code, the idea of AI generated code, the dynamics of a software project. There's a potential for a lot of change, including changes in the utilization of developers themselves. You think that Agile might be more successful in a lower code environment than, say, our full blown building a system from scratch environments?
That's a good question. It's actually one thing for Agile to be successful. One of the main powers of Agile are the principles of Agile,
Yep.
not necessarily the method. If you take the principles, and I don't have them all memorized. I always have to print them out myself.
Yep.
Like uh, the simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done,
Yep.
or at regular intervals, whatever it is, every 2 months, every 2 weeks, something, but consistently reviewing how the team is working, how your coding efforts are working. And what I mean by working, is it delivering value that
Yes.
people want?
Yeah, and that's the three things I talk about when I think about it outside the modern heart of Agile, Coburn's modern Agile concept. It was really boils down to me, iterative work, working in an iterative way, self-organization, driving decisions to the point by which the work is being done, and then, of course, creation of value, the understanding of always asking the value question. So go back to your thoughts. So the value thing is critically important, right? I mean, that's it.
And then on top, and then with that, inadequate use of metrics and feedback loops.
We had talked a lot about that last time. So, people love Six Sigma, the Motorola, GE world, lots of metrics, lots of valuation, and it's got, lean elements to it. But really, ultimately, there wasn't a set of metrics that could define the value of a coach. Was there? Did you ever see anything in your Capital One experience that talked about that? Like, how about this question? Did you ever see a scenario? What did you have to justify to bring another coach in? Just number of team players?
That's the first thing that comes to mind right there. The number of team players, because you have to have face-to-face with key people continuously. One coach spread out amongst 100 people, there's only so many times you're going to get in front. That coach is going to get in front of a person. And then if the person, let's call the development team members, they're only seeing the coach, meeting with the coach, getting a response from the coach once every month, they're more likely to ignore. They're not going to be seeing it enough.
Yeah, there's no relationship built there.
No.
So one of the metrics could have been, I always talk about attrition control. In complex environments, attrition's like the kiss of death. Did you ever see at Capital One any measurement or any of your other gigs around coaches are driving success because your attrition rates are lower, which then drives better velocity?
That is an interesting question as well, because the attrition rate, a lot of companies hide.
Interesting to hide it.
They hide the cause. They just see it's attrition. It's either going up or down, but they don't share why. It's interesting.
So in the next world of Agile, I think that's one area that, I would like to see that a misstep was utilizing some metrics to show how coaching improves retention, that which retention then drives increased productivity.
Yeah, exactly. That two-part connection. The first connection is, are people enjoying their time there?
Yeah.
That could be
if you're enjoying your time, you're going to be more productive. You just are.
It's exactly. It's that human side of the entire equation, kind of what we're talking about, people-driven Agile. We're talking about people enjoying their time working with each other, not enjoying your time working in Agile. No, they don't care all about that. They just want to go in there and just enjoy.
And they're getting things done. The ultimate goal is that it should be almost absent. The Agile thing should be almost absent. It's just the flow of work getting done and the success that incorporates it. Like as a business owner during tough times, it is hard. It's hard, so it's hard to keep your mental health straight. How about you're inside of a development team? If you don't feel the impacts of what you're doing or see any type of success, it's got to be a brutal situation.
From what I've seen, it always is. It always is. And we've both seen it where people think, oh, we'll just give them more money. That's more of a Band-Aid.
Yeah.
Eventually they burn out. Yeah. Even quicker sometimes.
Yeah. Because you thought it was, let's just say, the other piece of this on the misstep is, I got introduced to this concept about 5-6 years ago, but this idea of net exporter of talent. Some of the more, let's put it, more proactive large enterprises are really creating kind of this career center mentality to keep talent in the firm. So if you're going to coach someone, what you're ultimately doing is coaching them to become better, right? The goal is you become better, you want to grow into something. It's not like you just get better. We're not in the world where, you become a master at one thing and you do that for 30 years. That just really isn't our world anymore. You want to be coached so that you get better and then you move throughout the firm. That's a huge value attribute, right?
Tremendous. It's
So
tremendous
I
value.
wonder if coaches could measure their net exporter of talent, which is their capability to not only help retain talent, but move talent to other places in the organization and keep them, I guess the fancy word is matriculating through the company to the point by which they can create the most value. I don't want to the point of the Peter principle, but point where they can create the most value.
Yeah, and
Have you had any? Did you see any conversations like that at Cap One? I've seen it in some companies on the training side for sure.
I've seen it at Capital One, and again, Capital One is a great company. But I think I've seen it in many companies. The same thing that I saw at Capital One with coaches, and that was when people are becoming successful and happy, and they're moving around, delivering value, tailoring it back to the first step. But that's why I mentioned earlier, it's a two-step part. It's a two-part really of the Agile coach helped the developer become happier and more productive, and in that turn, they could visualize where they wanted to go, and they became happy moving somewhere else internally in the company, delivering value without setting up, let's say, a vacuum from where they were moving from.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of companies where this happens, where they're staying inside, the talent, I mean, is staying inside, moving different spots, but it's very difficult, or the coach did not tie directly back to what they did to cause some of that.
Yeah, so it's just lost. Poof.
Mm-hmm. They don't.
So
They
how
didn't
can you
tie
show
it.
creation
Some
of
do,
value?
but most don't. Most haven't. From what I've seen.
Yeah, and that's another misstep. I mean, the misstep here is that, I mean, it's like if you don't have some type of report about it, it does get lost. There's no way you can quantify it except for subjectively, anecdotally, right? And I'm sure there were coaches during this transition and layoff cycles that we had in 2023, frustrated, trying to anecdotally, talk through all the people they helped, but there was nothing tangible that they could show.
And that's part of the responsibility of every Agile coach for themselves, as well as every employee for themselves, to be able to figure out ways to show tangibility and intangible value, both. And if you don't know, maybe you get a mentor, an Agile coach mentor, or
business mentor to be able to confirm, to be able to
exactly a mentor
outside your own
mentor. Exactly. Somebody who has experience and knowledge in doing that maybe can tweak your mind to like, oh, I didn't think of it that way, and boom, there you go.
And I keep thinking about that as on the metric side of things, because I'm lucky as a business development business owner. My metrics are pretty clear, right? We talked about this last time as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But when you're getting down into a large, complex system and trying to show that value creation as one of the elements in that complex system, it can be a struggle. The frustrating part about it is Agile is a team sport, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
But, the team, in the corporate world, you don't live and die by the team. It's the elements with the team that are going to be laid off.
It's interesting you say that. One of the other things that I've seen, missteps that I've seen in a lot of organizations is when an Agile coach, whether it be a Scrum Master or an Enterprise Agile coach, come into an organization and they fail to customize those Agile practices to fit the organization.
Okay. So that's a big misstep.
I've seen that quite a bit. It kind of ties in with the paper tiger Agilist, and we can get to that in a moment.
Now love that concept. You love that one.
It drives me nuts personally because it sets a bad tone. But with the missteps about the failure, I've seen so many people so many Agile coaches, quote unquote Agile coaches, Scrum Master, come into an organization and say, this is how Scrum does it. This is how scaled Agile does it. This is how lean, less does it. And the organization may not be ready for every facet of that methodology.
Yeah.
And it ties in closely with another part: failure to train, failure to educate. If a development team doesn't know why we're doing a 2-week sprint or a daily scrum, they're more likely to be resistant to.
Well, you become a
Oh,
mechanism. You start feeling like
yeah.
you're on the Henry Ford production line. Really, I mean, that's kind of what I looked at in some cases. I mean, if I was a developer and all these different processes and procedures, I'd start feeling like I'm one of the cogs on the assembly line. And that's I guess you're a really high paid cog, but like we talked about, money isn't everything. At some point, you're just like, I mean, part of this whole transition was probably some developer revolt, right? I mean, the developer said, "We don't need this anymore. This isn't creating value," or the development leadership started saying it.
Yeah. It's interesting. This may be like a double-edged sword, but one of the successful examples I've seen, I've read about about Agile being implemented successfully in an organization, and that was Spotify.
Yep.
Spotify did their own version of Agile, but they
Mhm.
they followed the Agile principles to a T. They really did. But you notice one thing: do you find Scrum Masters there alone? No, you don't. They made that distinction, but the team was self-empowered with the Agile principles. They did have Agile at the beginning, Agile coaches, but the team were empowered and they took it upon themselves to succeed or fail. But they followed. It was an interesting case study that they followed Agile very successfully, but in their
Mhm.
own method. All the principles are followed perfectly.
And that's
As an
part of the
example.
morphing, right? So as you come
Yes.
out from the other side,
Mm.
I think going back to the conversation about framework versus the way of working, from my perch and what I've seen, it was this old change has been a revolt against the framework. It's like the tail wagging the dog. The framework and the layers of
Hmm.
overhead needed to operate the framework was deemed unworthy.
And I always wonder, I ask rhetorically, why is that? What's wrong with the framework?
Yeah, the question would be, ultimately, can the workers do the work without the framework? So a true agilist would say, if I can get the team to operate without the framework, coaches, scrum masters, the product owners, they're doing that work themselves. Isn't that the nirvana?
Ideally, yes. Why? And there's nothing wrong with that. Why? Because the purpose of a business, any organization, is to provide a product or a service to a customer that's willing to pay for it. When the customer
Yeah.
doesn't want to pay for it because there's no value
Yeah.
interpreted, there's no business, there's no job.
So the
So,
question is that possible? So one of the debates we're having as it relates to learning for the future is, how does a training company support an organization that has kind of chopped their framework off? They're still developing. They're probably in an agile, hybrid, waterfall world. How do we help a company like that?
now, if I'm understanding the question correctly,
Like, how does a training company? So training companies, we have a tendency to want to have some type of constant. So we're going to go in there and
okay.
teach you about SAFe, or we're going to go in there and teach you be a Scrum Master, or we're going to teach you the lean form of Agile fundamentals without any major tie in any specific framework, right? Some cases we kind of cause some of these problems. The certification world, the training
Yeah.
world, can proliferate it. But given this situation, I mean, the changing for us is, how do we help a team out that has chopped their framework off? I keep thinking of the word scaffolding. It's almost like you took your scaffolding off, you're still in operation. How do you support that group as it relates to successes for the future?
It's kind of funny. The training consultants that have been very successful at handling just that have come into organizations and they've listened to the organization and their pain points.
Mm-hmm.
And based on that, they tailor an approach that usually is just a part of, let's say you use the scaled agile. Scaled agile is a framework, for example, but they tailored it and they say, these are things you might want to try right now. And we have ideas for other things now, but we think you'd be more successful just doing this part at the moment. Let's educate, so you don't stop business where you're at. Let business continue to flow, but let's improve. And we believe, and this is what forecast, it can show, in 6 months, we can improve it by this much % with this much revenue. Something tying it back to something tangible right there.
Yeah, and what is it? Was velocity a good metric?
Velocity, I
burn down,
velocity, burn down, burn up, velocity, predictability, customer satisfaction, all that. They're all some people have used red and green for those. I'm like, no, they're just information. What is it telling us? And it's case by case. What is it telling us? Can we be better? Okay, how? Why? Just asking the question, why? Why do you think we can be better? Well, we're not delivering as much. Okay, how are people feeling? Are you seeing an attrition occurring over the last year?
Mm-hmm.
Are people feeling burnt out? Are people working 10, 12-hour days, feeling burned out? I mean, these are all just questions you have to ask, but from looking at those metrics that you mentioned.
And then the forwarding metrics have to be tied to the customer, whether internal or external. So is the internal or external customer getting value from what's being produced? And what level of value they're getting? I think I always thought, even in the business analysis world, because in some ways business analysis was the advent of the agile way, because you're just saying the team can do it instead of just one analyst. Mm-hmm. And I always talked in my BA talks about the value being some type of customer metric around use and around quality of use and improved productivity if you're dealing with internal people. And is that even possible given what you've seen in big organizations? I mean, do you think in a big organization, your big team, your multiple agile team rolls out a feature, you know who's using that feature, right? Right? Is there somebody that knows who's using that feature?
It can be the feature. It can be the story. Heck, it could even be the task, depending on if it's adding value. Very quick task. Why not? But if it's like building a pyramid. That sounds a bad analogy. I was just watching a show on Egyptian archaeology, so that's why it was in my mind. But all those rocks, bit by bit, you're all tasks to create this huge, epic capability. Huge. And each corner is a feature, but each block, for example, is adding value. And everyone can see what value it is, especially the customer. That's the key. If the customer doesn't see the value, then you got to do something to help communicate that value. Because levels of value, it's all perspective based on the customer.
So one of the first missteps, if we were sitting here and you jumped in late, is the definition of metrics that can be consumed by people who make decisions about company value. So we talked about attrition metrics. We talked about net exporter of talent metrics. We talked about value at the point by which the use is occurring metrics. And although the team is producing fast and effectively, does that still determine the fact that somebody's actually using it and using it well? That, to me, it wasn't a link.
No, there isn't. They're two different things. They could be related, but they are two different things. Velocity
I mean, I
Yeah,
mean, it's a great intellectual battle to say I'd rather you operate slow, so what it is that people use will ultimately be used, than operate fast and make something that is completely, even though it's great and it works well, is something that isn't needed.
it's interesting you say that. I think of one thing with that we just have to be aware of. Everybody has to be aware of. You want to be slow and have high quality, or do you want to be fast and
On the
stay ahead of your?
testing side, I want to be fast. On the
Yeah.
testing side, that's why there's almost,
Mhm.
as I look at the agile world, I think at some point you got to be looking at different types of teams, the teams that are testing teams and the teams that are production teams, because it's trying to mix those two teams together. The other mistake I think Agile did was they tried to force it on everybody. The reality is there's people that will never want to do Agile.
That's
Just
true.
not who they are. And it's not neither bad nor good. It's just not
Exactly.
who they are. Maybe we have a theory that says that everybody has to be this level of adaptability to survive. Well, okay, maybe there'll be an evolution. Maybe people will move towards that over time, but you couldn't force it at that point of transformation. And there was a lot of mistakes made there. Would you agree? What are your thoughts there?
I do agree. And we have to remember one thing. Agile came about because there was a cry out in the industry.
Yep.
That's in a way, metaphorically
The
speaking.
people
There was.
doing the work that here I'm trying to manage this team. This team is getting beat up. I'm getting beat up. I'm eating a poop sandwich, I used to call it all the time. And they're in the middle of the poop sandwich and they're the poop, right? And so it's like they needed something to be able to take a bit more control over the situation. And they
Yes,
came up with it.
and it came up, and they found out you were able to, at the very least, in one company, I'll tell you, United Healthcare, and one of the company United Healthcare, the senior leadership had a pilot program of Agile teams, and they rolled it out to everybody else. Why? And I can say this now; it's not a secret. They saw, statistically, no difference in the speed of how something was delivered,
Exactly.
but they saw a 3 to 5% drop in defects.
There you go.
And that was it. That was enough for them. I was like, that was interesting.
Then that's a
Magic.
metric. Is that what you got to do? Is you tie back the defects to use and re-repair. What's the amount of money needed to re-repair versus catching them early on? I mean, that's a metric that's been around, but I don't think I've heard much of it discussed in the agile world. I mean, at least at the generic level, it might have been, but I didn't see that. And I think, that's a great point on the defect side. So another measurement that could be used and worked with as we look at how do we define the next stage of Agile, then it maybe might not be so framework dependent or positional dependent.
Yes.
And that goes back to, okay, what's the team size going to look like? What is the tooling going to be within that team size? Can AI support that team such that you can work effectively with a smaller team size? Where does low code, no code fit into this as well? It's a lot of things that need to be taken in consideration going on the next steps. One of the things I love is some of the agilists who are really strong in delivery and understanding how to deliver organizational value, talking about the small team AI driven function, with each entity doing work, but having the skills of a product owner and a coach and a scrum master, but doing work. I don't know if does that make sense to you? Have you seen
yeah, it
anything on
does.
that?
I've seen a lot of teams in different companies looking at that to see how they could use it. How? I think it's the how, and I think there's a lot of ways to do it. We can have a whole conversation, maybe another show on that alone.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people are just learning about all the possibilities of AI, let alone using it in Agile and all the Agile areas.
So, well, this has been great. We talked about different metrics. We talked about some of the continued missteps that we believe happen in the metric side of things, in the hiring side, the mindset, and the calculating value at the employee level and their growth. So we got a lot of things covered here, Gil. Any last point you want to make before we drop off?
I think if you for Agilists out there, focus on what value are you bringing to your customer, and look at the Agile principles, and I think you'll be all right.
You'll find the metric that you can associate, that you can start to socialize using business bingo words. And that socialization of that metric means that you have a level to justify existence.
Exactly.
It's interesting. Well, Gil, thank you so much for a wonderful conversation. I'll end it here. Have a great one. Thank you, Gil.
All right. Thanks, David.